Right, I was making my transition to rook versus pawn video, which I've now called transition to rook versus pawn 1, when the recording just sort of cut out. But it cut out on this position, which is white to play. It's a study from 1987. It's pretty hard. Pause the video and have a go at it. See what you come up with. It's one of those studies as well that you can get right second time. Just play a move, go through it, get to the end and go, that doesn't work. And then you realise why it doesn't work and what your first move should have been. It's a pretty hard first move to find. What's not hard to find is Rook E1 is a dreadful move. That's not hard to work out. Rook F8 check. If the king goes to the E file, Rook E8 picks up the white rook and the game. That's fairly obvious. If the white king just goes forward, if the white king gives up the G pawn, let's say king G4 first of all, Rook G8 check. If at this stage white thinks, well, hang on a minute, my king's going to be just sort of getting nowhere on F3, black could just queen straight away. You can see that black's going to win the rook versus pawn there. So what I'll do is I'll go forward to F5. I'll just have to give up the G pawn. It's hopeless, absolutely hopeless. Push the C pawn to defend it. Rook C2. You can see that's completely hopeless. So Rook E1 is a dreadful move and loses to Rook F8 check straight away. So not that. How else are we going to stop this B pawn that's about to become a queen? Well, one very natural move is to unleash a pin on that B pawn and just play a move you want to play anyway. Like, you've got to think that this is the pawn that, with the help of our king, is going to get us the draw. But why not give black something else to think about in the middle of it? And given that black's got something else to think about, yeah, shove it up the board. Why not? Well, black still wins this, unfortunately, with Rook F8 check, King to G6, and then King to B3. And now that B pawn threatening to be queened, so we have to take it. And the Rook F8 check was actually very good for getting the white king onto the G file. So it's like the special case of knight's pawn, basically causing trouble now. But the black king's still a long way away. So you think, well, I'm still just going to push this pawn, G4. And then the black king comes in, King C3. Okay, push the pawn again. Black king glides past the white C pawn, sort of maybe just shaving the bottom right hand corner of that C pawn on its journey up the board. You're thinking, what are you talking about? Kings shaving pawns? Like, what? Like, why is that relevant anyway? What are you talking about? Would you be upset if the answer was nothing? Just gibberish. King H7, Rook F7, King H8, King comes in, push the G pawn, check, King H7, King comes in, push the G pawn, pin the G pawn, and you want to play King H8 here, because after King H8, if Rook takes G7, it's stalemate. It's not stalemate. That pesky C pawn that the black king just glided past, shaving the corner. If only it had taken it so that it wasn't a glide past. So, C3. Wow. Find the best chess player you know. Get them to find C3 without probing that study for a long time. All the same moves. Rook F8 check. King G6. King B3. Takes. And we see the race. There was the C pawn getting gobbled up. All the same moves, like I say. By the way, actually, back at this rook f7 check stage, you do have to play king h8. King h6 would still lose in this rather nice way. King e5, g6, rook down to f1. I think what's so good about that? g7, well, king f6. You're getting mated. You'd have to give up a knight. You'd have to knight and then give up that knight to not get mated. So rook f7 check, king h8, king e5, g6, rook f8 check, sorry, king h7, king in, pin, king h8, stalemate, draw. So well played if you found c3. You might actually have found rook e7. That's a pretty clever drawing move. If you remember, rook e1 was a disaster because rook f8 check and the king can't go to the e file because of rook e8 check. But if we put our rook the other side of the king, rook f8 check, king e6, the king's sort of already close enough to this pawn in what's going to end up as rook versus pawn. Okay. Notice another clever thing about this rook move to e7 is that if the black pawn queens, we've got check and then takes, and then we're easily going to be able to draw that. So rook e7 was actually another clever way to draw that. Right, one other study. I mean, I've only got 2 studies in this video because I meant to include them in the last video, but my recording just stopped for some reason. This is a study from 1923. It's extremely hard. Pause the video and have a go at it. White to play. So the first move's quite easy to find, but there's so many other moves and the rest of it that are not easy to find. You'll be doing astonishingly well, to be honest, if you found every little nook and cranny, every little variation that you need to know for this to win this position for white. But the first move is fairly obvious to find, e6. Okay, the d7 pawn's pinned. What does black do there? They look like they're in trouble, but they have got rook f6, which is quite a good move. Because, for example, if white just takes that pawn straight away, then we've got rook d6 check. That forces the white king that way onto the e file. We can pick up the d pawn, king e6, and black can just push their f pawn. We played king e6 to make contact with the d pawn so that we can play rook c8 to promote. But you can see that we're nowhere near in this rook versus pawn race in a minute. Black could just push the f pawn here, actually, to be honest, but we can also just check and do that thing where we get the white king miles away and then push the c pawn. So we're going to lose our rook for the d pawn, fine, but this is also just a draw. Okay, so there's no point just taking the pawn on d7. You have to shove in. This was the other crucial move you need to find, rook b7 check. So that when black plays king a6, hitting the rook, then you play e takes d7. Okay. Something worth mentioning is that you couldn't do that the other way around. If you decide to play rook b7 check first of all, king a6, and then e6, black's got c5 check. And now you're in a bit of trouble. Okay, it's still a draw. You've got 2 drawing moves, but you've actually got lots of losing moves here. You think, why couldn't black play this c5 check in the other variation then? Well, our rook was still on c7. It would just come down, checked the black king, and then would have won the game very easily, taken the rook afterwards. So you had to play the moves in this order. By the way, you're in big trouble here if you allow this d pawn to move with check. So that loses to d takes e6 check. That loses to d6 check. Those 2 moves lose to d5 check. You've got to play king d3 or king c3. And after king d3, for example, rook f5. If rook takes d7, we can see rook e5. And this pawn is going to get traded for this one. Probably straight away, actually. I think e7. E7 looks like white might have messed it up. Let's have a look. E7 is still a draw, but yeah, black just pushes the f pawn. White can. So I'm just sort of messing around looking at the engine now. But white can still draw this apparently by playing king c4. I'm interested in this now. What's going on here? Oh, of course. Yeah, we do a check. Come out this way, and then we're going to trade. Okay, so that's still a draw. Where had we got to? So yeah, you can't do the moves in the other order. It has to be e6 first, rook f6, rook b7 check, king e6, and then taking on d7. If black plays rook f8, we can go rook c7, where we're threatening rook c8, so that has to be dealt with. We've got rook d8, but now white can play king c5, and if the f-pawn gets pushed, we've got king d6, f-pawn gets pushed again, we can take this with check and come down to c1. That's over. Okay, so rook f8, no good. Black has to play rook d6, check. Okay. But this time, because of our little intermezzo a minute ago, we can come to the c file, and that's going to be quite important, king c5. Black might as well nab the pawn whilst they're there. And now our rook's got to move. And when it does, we're going to be losing our d-pawn. Like, what? What's so good about this? What's so clever about it? And you have to find rook b2. Absolutely brilliant move, rook b2. The idea is that if the d-pawn gets taken, king takes c6, and black has no way to prevent the checkmate in one without just losing the rook. So what do? Rook b2. Well, various choices. They might think to set up a fortress, to be honest. Just go for the queen versus rook. Check. Check. Back to b5. But this queen c7 move and that fortress starts to fall apart pretty quickly. That's going to be a win for white. So they can't set up a fortress by taking the rook on b2. If they play rook d1, that's not the rank they want to be on, the first rank. Then we can just take the c-pawn. Check. And we're going to reach a sort of version of Lucena. I mean, black's main problem is they want to push the f-pawn for a reason that's going to become apparent in a minute. They don't want to have to defend their f-pawn by moving their rook back up the board. They want to defend their f-pawn as far down the board as possible. If they didn't have their f-pawn, by the way, this would just be the Lucena position and completely won. So yeah, they might try f3. The problem with f3 is that white can just shove their rook behind the d-pawn. And now you have no way to prevent both this move and this move. Your king's not close enough, so the king's coming out. It's just completely over. White's about to queen. So you can't push the f-pawn. You might be wondering, in light of the main line we're about to see, you might not be wondering it yet, but later on you might be wondering, well, why can't they play rook e1 here then? Because in the line we're about to see, putting the rook on the e file is given sort of an exclamation mark, and black draws. It's like, well, why isn't it a draw here? Well, white can play rook f2, attack the f-pawn. Like I say, if that f-pawn goes, we've got the Lucena position, so black has to hold on to it, and they hold on to it with rook e4, and putting the rook on this rank to defend the f-pawn is a disaster, as we're about to see. So just trust me for now, they can't do that. Their best try is rook d3, okay? Because the idea is now they can push the f-pawn, they can defend their f-pawn, but crucially not too far up the board. And indeed, if white just carries on with the same variation, king takes c6, rook c3 check, king d6, we check the white king behind the d-pawn. Black now plays rook e3, and if we attack the f-pawn, black can just push it, and defend their f-pawn on the third rank. And if instead white tries the rook d2 move, the black rook is preventing the king getting out this way. We can now just move the black king in to prevent the white king getting out that way. And white's got nothing better than to check and come back to d2. It's kind of the Luthena position, but not, because black's got this extra f-pawn, which crucially they can defend on the third rank. So you're like, that's a bit annoying, isn't it? Rook d3. It's a pretty clever move. White has only one winning move here, which I'm sure you saw back in the original position. Rook b3. Sort of same interference idea, or deflection. I mean, deflection's like a subset of interference, isn't it? Rook b3, and yeah, what does black do now? We've already established that going to the first rank's not very good, so let's go to the second rank. But now they're not going to be able to defend their f-pawn on the right rank. Takes, check the king behind the pawn, then block the e-file. White comes and attacks the f-pawn, rook e4. A minute ago I said that's a disaster, but didn't explain why. It's because we're now going to see why. And it's just too close. So that the key of Luthena is the bridge building. But if the black rook's that close, then it's done. I suppose black might have one last sneaky try, which is to come down here and hope you queen straight away. I think rook d3 would do it, but I'm sure rook takes f4 also as good as rook d3. Yeah, so rook takes f4 is checkmate in 9, rook d3 is checkmate in 10. So how about that? e6, have to play this intermezzo check, then take on d7, and then when the black rook comes down and nabs the d-pawn, we play rook b2 first, and then rook b3. Anyway, I mean, my argument about transferable skills, because this is meant to be transition to rook versus pawn, and I'm not sure how practical either of the two studies were in this video, and maybe the transferable skills argument's looking a bit shaky, to be honest. So just hopefully we enjoyed them. They're just really, really enjoyable studies.